So I was with Cal-OSHA for about 28 years as the senior public health medical officer. And I've been retired about 7 years now. I particularly got interested in why it was that the Richmond Refinery fire occurred. It's really a fire and explosion. So I began to look at it very closely. And the ineffectiveness of the Cal-OSHA enforcement, or they call it compliance, is astounding. I'll start with looking at, there are two reasons why it was so weak. One is the understaffing. Cal-OSHA actually has 160 enforcement officers for 18 million workers in California. We used to have a much better ratio. The ratio is about 1 to 100,000, over 100,000 workers. We used to have a much better ratio than that. When I first went to work for Cal-OSHA, when Jerry Brown was governor and he was a young guy, and he was at least somewhat, how shall I put it, in tune with what was happening to in our workplaces and our environment regarding health issues and illness and accidents. And he's just, since he's come in office, unfortunately, he's made no changes from the previous Republican governors, Wilson, Schwarzenegger, and now Jerry Brown. So let me just make a few points here about what was going on at the Chevron Richmond Refinery. They have in Cal-OSHA a separate division called Process Safety Management for all of California, and they cover not just the refineries, but California is loaded with chemical plants. In fact, it has more chemical plants than any state in the country. And so there's about 1,600 all told, and there are dozens of refineries. So what they did at Chevron, this is really a profile of Cal-OSHA ineptitude. What they were doing at the Chevron refineries over the last 6 years, they did 150 hours of inspection. You would say, well, at least they did some inspection. Well, actually, one of those, there were 3 inspections. One, they didn't look at all. They just read documents from the Chevron management. The other 2 times, they went out for short periods of time. So there was no real oversight by Cal-OSHA. And what was going on at Chevron during that period of time? Well, they were bringing in new low-grade kinds of oil, and they're called high sulfur content. And so what happens is when you run that kind of oil through the pipes, sulfidation occurs, which is corrosion of the pipes from inside. And there was a memo that was passed out for all the refinery for all the Chevron refinery management to read and to take a whole new approach to safety of their pipes. Well, the Richmond plant got that memo, and it was in 2002. In other words, 10 years before this refinery explosion occurred. The explosion, by the way, was in August 6th of 2012. So that was about, 8-9 months ago. Cal-OSHA went in to investigate this, and they came out with 23 serious citations. 11 of those were willful. What willful means is management knew that this was going to occur and let it happen anyway. They did nothing about it. And there was a lot of documentation around that, all of what was going on. And what Cal-OSHA was doing, well, let me backstep for a minute. Cal-OSHA inspections are supposed to be complaint-driven. They don't go out on an inspection unless a worker or a union representative complains about an unsafe workplace condition. And they're supposed to respond within 72 hours. They're supposed to arrive unannounced so that management doesn't get a chance to fix the situation. They can see it as it really is. And they're supposed to include the workers or the Workers' Safety Committee and the union representatives. In this situation, a year before this explosion, again, remember August 6, 2012, around August of 2011, there was a pipe leak. And the workers got rather upset and complained to Cal-OSHA and said, you have to look at this. You have to do something about it. Cal-OSHA did not respond. They ignored the worker complaints. And then, of course, on August 6th, there was a pipe leak. And this is another big criminal action by the Chevron management. The pipe leak occurred. It's at a very high temperature, high pressure. It comes out like a gas. And it's very hot. So you've got condensation of the water vapor in our, breathing atmosphere. So it looks like steam, but it's a hot petroleum gas, and it's very volatile. So instead of shutting it down, which they could have done, they have valves, they just could shut it off. They kept it running. They told their workers to go over there and tear off the insulation and find the leak. Now, let me give you the background of that, another step back. It turns out that over the last 10 years plus, Chevron has been finding pipes that are very thin and leaking. Instead of replacing them, they took the cheap route. They put what you'd call clamps on them. They leave the same pipe, and they put a clamp over it. This came out at Congressman Miller's hearing. And that's outrageous. That's criminal, to put everybody at risk with temporary clamps. Some of those clamps remained for years. Now to move up again to the April 6th. So they called out about 20 guys and a subcontractor because they had to put up scaffolding to get up to the leak. And the guy went up with a pole and what he called a pike. It's a sharp point. And he started tearing off the insulation. And it was a very difficult thing to do. And as he's doing this with this sharp pike, 90% of this pipe had been eroded down to about the thickness of a dime. And of course, he's poking away with this pike, and it penetrates the pipe with the high-pressure hot gas. So it escapes, and out comes this white condensed gas. The fire engine, the sequence of events is just incredible. The on-site fire engine arrives because they have firefighters on site. And they get out and they start looking at the situation, and they see that. And in the meantime, the workers are in contact with management, and management says, go ahead. So they still don't shut it down. And finally, and they don't know where the spark comes from. Finally, a spark ignites that condensed gas. And it turns into a mushrooming black cloud that goes up about 5,000 feet. This happened 2 hours after the leak first started. And blankets Richmond. And then what happened? So in the interim, step back again. In the interim, the workers suddenly realized, we better get the hell out of here. This is looking really dangerous. So they started to run. There was one guy still in the fire engine who had a firefighter's outfit on. When the thing catches fire, the black smoke starts arising. He says, I got to get out of here. The engine won't start. He has to jump out of the cab of his fire engine and run like hell. And he happened to have personal protection on, so he ran through the fire. Now, there were 5 workers that have what they call non-serious effects, injuries, 5 workers. There were 15,000 residents in Richmond that had to go to hospitals. Let me talk about the health effects for that for a minute, because what they talk about is irritation. Well, they had irritation. There are a few kids who had, problems with their asthma. That's, as we say, BS. Those acute health reactions are a sign that these people are going to have serious long-term reactions. What we have, there's a medical diagnosis that's called RADS, Reactive Airway Disease Syndrome. If you're exposed to a lot of irritation in your lungs, in the future, you're going to be much more sensitive to other irritants. So like an asthmatic kid is going to get more asthmatic exacerbations and have to go to the hospital or take more medication. And the outlook for long-term health, for the workers in particular, also for the residents, because they're getting a lot of the downwind, these combustion products from this refinery. You're talking about what we call polyaromatic hydrocarbons. These are carcinogenic. They also put the people at risk for endocrine disruption. and for reproductive abnormalities, for abnormal birth defects, and on. So these are very serious exposures. And I bring this up because later I want to tell you what some of the fixes should be, the remediation. But I just want to continue for a minute on the ineptitude of Cal-OSHA, because they are the only regulatory agency that has any clout over this refinery, that can put a legal demand that this refinery immediately remediate these kind of actions that they had been doing. There's a section in Cal-OSHA called the Bureau of Investigations. Now, they're supposed to, if there's any death, or if there's over 5 of the employees suffer health reactions, which was true in this instance, or if the chief of Cal-OSHA decides that the event is serious enough to warrant a criminal investigation, they're supposed to call in the Bureau of Investigations. Well, they haven't done that. And they were confronted with this by Steve and several other people at one of the community member meetings. And their response was, it's in the process. In other words, they lied. It wasn't in the process, and they're not doing it. Now, that's important because Cal-OSHA came up with all of these citations, 25 of them serious. They had $1 million in fines. Now, that's less than a slap on the wrist for a refinery of this size. This refinery turns out $37 million of product every day. So you've got less than a 2 or 3% daily penalty on this refinery. So it's nothing. But guess what Chevron's doing? They're going to appeal it. So if you appeal that, so they don't have to do anything. There's no legal requirement that do any remediation or that Cal-OSHA has any real legal oversight. So what they're going to do is they're going to appeal it. That'll take 2 to 4 years with no legal requirements. So it is very important that the Bureau of Investigations be brought in, that part of Cal-OSHA, do the investigation on management, and take it to the district attorney and demand that there be a full criminal investigation. Out of that could come some real legal requirements for remediation. If they don't do that, there are no legal requirements on Chevron. This is important to understand. Cal-OSHA is not doing the kind of oversight, the kind of enforcement, compliance that they ought to be doing with this kind of gigantic, catastrophic event. In conclusion, I just want to say that when you look at this kind of situation, there are 2 things. One is they not only ignored the workers here, the United Steelworkers, but they failed to include them in their investigation. You know, when I worked for Cal-OSHA, the first thing we did was we talked to the union members, we talked to the shop stewards who were in charge of safety, and we included them in the investigation. Not only did we get all of their complaints, but when we went on we call it a wall-to-wall investigation or a walkthrough, we went with the union members and with the workers. They were included. In fact, legally, they have to be included and not ignored like Cal-OSHA did in this instance. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, where the hell is the monitoring of the air contaminants, not only in the plant that the workers are being exposed to on a day-to-day basis, but at the plant boundaries where the community is exposed? They don't exist. So the Bay Area Quality Management comes up with a report, no problem, you know, we didn't find anything. I mean, that's so outrageous, it's unbelievable, with 15,000 people going to hospitals right after. Anyway, so the other thing, my other point would be that part of any safety program should be adequate monitoring within the plant and also at the plant fence boundaries, so we know exactly what's going on there. And that should, and certainly that's what I would call the least of what they should do. Now, let me go over what the Bureau of Investigation, let me go over the Chemical Safety Board. They're a federal agency. They have a very small staff, actually. I forget what it is. Oh, their budget, I think, is $12 million a year. Chemical Safety, Board. They came up, they were the only agency, federal agency it was, that came up with a report that told really what was going on at the Richmond Chevron Refinery. Cal-OSHA maintained a tight lip. 6 months, it took 6 months to come up with their penalties. And their penalties, yes, they were very strict. Yes, they were a strong indictment of Chevron. But the problem is that Cal-OSHA is not talking. They're tight-lipped. When you ask them, they were asked to come to this meeting today, refused. You know, they're acting like they're some kind of, I don't know, some kind of secretive agency that's going to make their own decisions and not let the public know too much about it. Well, that's entirely wrong, you know. And I think that is, let me talk about the lack of staffing once more. Yes, that's an important problem and cause of what happened there in Richmond. But there's another thing happening at Cal-OSHA that's equally important, and that is what we call what I would call a pro-corporate direction. They have a very large program that's called Voluntary Protection Program, VPP. And that program essentially takes the big corporations and tells them pretty much, they actually give them gold stars. You get a gold star, and you can take care of your own health and safety program. We really trust you, and we're not going to do any planned inspections of your manufacturing or whatever they're doing. What happened with Chevron is the standards board at Cal-OSHA gave them a special variance where they said, well, you can go ahead and do your own safety program, and we're going to trust you. And that's exactly the way these OSHA inspected acted toward Chevron Richmond. And I think that's outrageous. This program, Cal-OSHA, was originally set up, OSHA in general, was set up in 1972, under, of all things, the Nixon administration. And it was always a program for the workers, for the employees, and not a program for the corporations. And the direction that Cal-OSHA has taken, it's made it a kind of, love fest with the corporations. We know you're taking care of business, and you go ahead. And I think that's equally a problem with Cal-OSHA, equal to the lack of adequate staffing. And with that, if you have any questions or anything like that? Yeah.
Don't you believe that some of them Cal-OSHA employees are undercover capitalists?
Could you repeat that?
Don't you think that, would you take in consideration that some of those Cal-OSHA employees was undercover capitalists protecting their investment in Chevron? They might have secrets, they might have stock in Chevron, and they're trying to protect their profits. So they're gonna minimize the amount of fine or whatever their findings is to reduce the amount of claims, the insurance payments that they have to pay out to the people who file claims against these respiratory diseases and things that they encounter because of this?
Yeah, two things about that, and then I'll answer directly your question. But one of the things is, one of the questions, impinges on, well, what is Chevron doing there in Richmond? What are they doing with money, right? Well, it turns out that they have a very heavy role in the Richmond City Council. In fact, they pour in a lot of money to get council members elected. And there's a lot of pressure because they put in millions of dollars every year into the city treasury. So they do control a lot of what the responses are among the Richmond elected officials. As far as Cal-OSHA, Cal-OSHA is like any big bureaucratic agency. Pretty much they're top-down ordered. There's like the woman who runs, Baker, who runs the Department of Industrial Relations, pretty much now keeps a clamp on Cal-OSHA. She makes the decisions. She makes the decisions on workers' compensation and what's going on with taking away most of the rights and benefits that people used to have with workers' compensation claims. And now she's pretty much, riding a tough herd on the inspectors at the agency. And the inspectors, tend to take the route that, you know, they feel they're at risk. They've been hammered by enforced furloughs, cutting their salaries, cutting the number of staff, and they feel their jobs are at risk, and they're not going to stick their necks out. That's really what's going on. And these guys are not high paid. They're industrial hygienists, and they get what you'd call a low to medium pay. So I don't know how many of them may have investments in Chevron. There's no way to know, though, you know.